Unhurried came out of a conversation with my friend here in Cambridge, Anthony Quinn, when we were discussing the difference between really good improv theatre performances that we'd been in or watched and really painful and awful ones. And essentially the difference was that the terrible scenes were manic, the actors would be tripping over each other, there'd be too many crazy ideas, and you'd end up with what I call marshmallow motorbike scenes, where a simple scene of two plumbers ends up being going to Mars on marshmallow motorbikes, kind of crazy. And the satisfying scenes were kind of the opposite of that. The players weren't tripping over each other, they were well paced, the ideas built gently and in a satisfying way. And the word Anthony used to describe those scenes was unhurried, and immediately light bulbs went on for both of us around that word, because we realised that that captures a lot of things in life that are satisfying, not just in theatre but in work and in play and leisure and relationships. The unhurried is a very human quality that we both realised we wanted to see more of in our lives. So Unhurried Conversations were the first experiment that Anthony and I launched under the Unhurried flag. Essentially they're coffee shop conversations where instead of the usual cut and thrust of conversation, only one person talks at a time, and we use something like a sugar bowl or a mug, and whoever's holding the sugar bowl gets to talk, and whoever isn't holding it gets to listen. So when you're holding it, you can speak uninterrupted, and if you're not holding it, you just get the pleasure of hearing a person without feeling the need to correct them, change what they're saying, ask questions or anything. And that very simple device, that apparently very simple device, seems to lead to a whole different quality of conversation. It really seems to have taken off in Cambridge. We regularly have 15 or 20 people come to them, and they've now started popping up in other parts of the world where people I know have heard about the process and have launched it. So there's now an Unhurried conversation group in Santa Cruz, in Washington State, Sydney, and a few other places as well. I mean, of course, you can have a very good and an unhurried conversation without necessarily using a sugar bowl, but the effect of that simple device is actually quite interesting. And I think because it just disrupts what we take as normal in conversation. So we're perfectly used to constantly interrupting each other in conversations. That's our idea of a good time. As soon as you mess with that small, apparently simple dynamic, something very different seems to happen in the conversation. There's a whole different quality of attention. And it seems to take a lot of the urgency out of conversation, which people might at first miss and find a bit odd. But most people who come to it very quickly realise that it's actually very satisfying. I mean, you often get people who come thinking, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to cope with this because I like interrupting all the time. And 10 minutes in, they've forgotten that they like interrupting all the time, and they realise actually they can just relax in this format. And I think, if I think about the sort of the bigger philosophy of Unhurried, I think it asks us to pay attention to how tiny shifts can have large impacts. It invites us to become a bit more sensitive to all the things we're doing as complex, rich, human creatures that affect how we relate to each other. So I imagine that some people hearing about Unhurried might think, well, you know, that would be a fine leisure time activity, but that's a bit esoteric, you know, do you have to wear open-toed sandals to do this? But actually, I think Unhurried is a very profoundly practical, down-to-earth practice. So, you know, in the workplace, people are often confronted with challenging situations and people. An unhurried approach to those difficult things means that instead of running away from them, or just doing what you normally do, or panicking, or shouting at people, you slow down enough to go, what are my other choices here? How else can I respond to this in a way that's more satisfying? So when I'm using this in work situations, people are often quite surprised at the insights that they gain and how they just go about their lives a little bit differently as a result of thinking about it in this way. So actually it turns out to be a very down-to-earth and practical way of approaching any kind of creative challenge. I suppose what I've noticed about Unhurried and why I love it as a word is almost every time I mention it to people as, I don't know, in the context of what I'm doing or what I'm working, what seems to happen nearly all the time is there's some little thing appears to go on in their brain. Their eye moves in the way that says, oh, I'm thinking. And I think it's like sort of two simultaneous things are happening. One is some part of them goes, oh, I like the sound of that. And another part of their mind is going, what is it? So they know that they're quite attracted to it, but they're wondering what it is, and a bit of them is going, oh, but we couldn't possibly do that here. So it seems to be a word that just triggers some creative thinking just by mentioning it. And what Anthony and I have noticed is if you just attach unhurried to almost any noun, it makes you think about that noun in a different way. So, if I'm panicking and I go, what would it be like to panic in an unhurried way? My brain goes, what? Oh, and starts thinking creatively. If we apply it to, I don't know, take a buzzword like innovation, and you ask yourself, well, what would unhurried innovation look like? People's brains just go, I don't know, that would be a bit different. It seems to provoke interesting questions. What would an unhurried divorce look like? One of the most satisfying things about unhurried conversations, whether they're this cafe version or whether it's in a work environment, is that people surprise you with their quite unexpected announcements of insights that they've had or discoveries that they've made, stuff that nobody else in the group was particularly expecting. So I've seen people in work environments just spontaneously announce that they realise that they've been behaving in ways that aren't terribly productive, and they're going to try and do something different. And what's so great about that is no one's even been complaining to them or trying to teach them or make a point to them about the way they've been behaving. They've just kind of noticed it for themselves. And the joy of it for me, the real joy of this for me is, in our hurried world, I think we spend a lot of times trying to teach people things. And mostly I think people get rather resentful of being told what to do and taught things. We're much happier as human beings when we make the discoveries for ourselves. And unhurried conversations seem to be a little bit of an engine for that kind of serendipitous discovery. And it's just the most satisfying thing to be around. There's just a real pleasure for me in just hearing about the insights that people have got for themselves, unbidden.